All right. Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order our Academic Achievement Committee meeting. My name is Shayla Adams Stafford. I'm the chair of this committee and the District 4 representative on the Prince George's County Board of Education. Thank you to everyone for being here this evening. May I have a motion to approve the September 27th, 2021 meeting agenda?
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a second? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you so much. May I have a motion to approve the June 17th, 2021 meeting minutes?
So moved.
Okay, can I have a second? I think I just need a second.
I think I was hesitant to second just because I was not on the committee at that time, but I think for the sake of moving it forward, I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. So we have no registered public comment speakers for this evening, but I wanted to just go over some of our discussion items for today. So our first step is that I'd like to discuss the proposed 2021-2022 Academic Achievement Committee work plan. And I'll start with the motion, and then if we want to have some discussion, we certainly can. But may I have a motion to approve the Academic Achievement Committee's 2021-2022 work plan?
So moved.
Okay. Second, okay. Aisha, is this the time if we wanted to have some discussion before we?
So did you want me to put, there were two proposed, so you had the ones you sent me, and then
Yeah,
White also submitted one. You want me to put those up?
sure, that's fine.
Okay. 1 second. This is the one that you proposed originally.
Okay. So maybe Dr. White, did you want to walk us through some of the changes you had on the one you submitted?
Sure, it would be easy. Well, one of the things I'll say, if you notice this one, and if Aisha, you want to scroll through the original, you'll notice that you all had planned for 2 meetings a month almost, except for I think maybe December. And the topics were kind of like, a lot of the topics actually are not mine. So I would have to work with colleagues to bring things. I know a lot of things overlay academics. So then if you go to mine, one of the biggest things that I did was we couldn't make all of those dates. And kind of the reason that we can't make those dates is I have to pull on staff. And our greatest support right now is to support our schools. And we're not doing professional development during the day to not pull our teachers from our students. And so that means all of our professional development is done in the evenings, and really giving staff an opportunity to meet with their teachers, to have office hours, to really be supportive. So one of the things that I did then before this meeting, I sent back an email with the dates that we were available. And then board member Shayla Adams Stafford, we combined topics. So where I knew, like, you might have wanted human resources, instead of having them over 3 different dates, I put their topics together. And so sequentially, I tried to go through and say, yeah, okay, definitely. I know mental health is critical, so I kept that in October, but I tried to move things around so it kind of made sense with the flow and with trying to bring offices together at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is fine for me. The only thing I may want to consider is thinking about the principal rotation discussion, maybe having that moved to November. But I think, thank you for making the condensing of the meetings. And I think, it was an ambitious plan, right? I was thinking that we could tackle talking about literacy and special education throughout the year, kind of as like two themes to dive deep on, because we know that literacy is going to be that gateway for all students and that access point. And special education is definitely something that constituents are concerned about. So I do like how we are touching on that throughout the year, though. So I approve of this plan. If there are others that have any other thoughts that they'd like to make.
Yes. I just want to say that I absolutely love, I think the order everything is in, I think, especially with the focus of special education, but then mental health. So I truly appreciate that Dr. White keeping that as a focus early on in the school year. And I as well agree with how everything else is laid out. So thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure then that I know the work plan has, like Dr. White alluded to, 2 meetings per month, but then the actual calendar has 1 per month. And so assuming we do approve this, we are approving these dates here and not including the dates that are on the work plan, correct?
That's correct. That would be correct. And we still pretty much got everything in. I just kind of batched it together. And then one of the things for HR, so that you still want them to come later, you're fine with them coming later to do teacher and principal evaluation and teacher recruitment. You just want to have an opportunity to talk about principal rotation and leadership opportunities in November.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. I'll make that adjustment and send that over by Wednesday.
Okay. So if everyone's okay with this, we can go ahead and vote on it. So I think we had a motion and then a second. So I guess all in favor, you can say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that passes. Did I just see a hand? No? Okay. All right. Okay, so we can continue on from here. Get my notes back up. So the Academic Achievement Committee work plan is approved. So here are the discussions and presentations that we'll have today. We're going to start off with talking about literacy for special education and special education baseline data, culturally responsive curriculum, and then acceleration versus remediation. So I'll turn it over to Dr. White and we can get started.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I brought, for anyone that doesn't know Trinell Bowman, everyone should know Trinell Bowman. She is our guru for special education, and I brought her tag team along with me today. And just one other note about the work plan. I kind of left your title, so oftentimes we might reference it as something else, but I didn't want to touch your words, if that makes sense. So sometimes we may come and you may hear me call it something else, but no, we're still dealing with the topic, but I didn't want to go that intricate on the work plan. So just so we know.
That's fine.
Okay, so Trinell is going to share a little bit about special education. And then I actually brought along a small presentation to just kind of tell you about the culturally responsive work we've done thus far, and just to talk about where the district has been with equity and how that's evolving. And then I do not have necessarily a presentation for acceleration and remediation, but I definitely want to have a dialogue and conversation just about how we approach that. What's my thought about remediation versus acceleration, what our work looks like in the district, and how we're kind of touching point on that. And then after each topic, we can stop and pause. If you want to have questions, I will let you guide that part once we finish each one, so that you can take the pulse of the team.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll turn it over to Trinell. And for those that don't know, Trinell is our Associate Superintendent for Special Education.
Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege and a great honor to be here with you this evening to present kind of the state of special education around some data points, as well as professional learning that we're doing and our approach to supporting our literacy efforts in our district. So again, thank you for allowing me to be here this evening. Again, I'd like to acknowledge all of our Board of Education members, and I would also like to acknowledge our Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Golson, for all of your work in supporting academic excellence in our district. I always like to start with kind of who our students are in terms of who we're serving. You know, the state of Maryland is a birth to 21 state, meaning that we serve students really right out of the NICU unit all the way to age 21. So this slide just provides you with the data sources of who we serve. We've broken the data down into 3 categories: the number of students that we serve from birth to age 2. This data is current as of October 1st, 2021. So I wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And then we also provide services for students ages 3 to 21. Those are students who are served by an individualized education program. And then our student total number of population of students from birth to age 21 is 16,226 students. The next slide gives you our student count by disability category. And again, these are the students that we serve ages 3 through 21. Our highest disability category are students with specific learning disabilities. About 36% of our student population in Prince George's County are students with specific learning disabilities. We know that those students are impacted in the area of reading and mathematics and writing. We also know that our data trends with national data. And so if you look at a snapshot of data across our nation, specific learning disability would be your highest disability category. Our next 2 highest disability categories are students with autism. About 15% of our students have autism, and 15% of our students are considered developmental delay. I do want to let you know that for students who are developmentally delayed by age 8, by their 8th birthday, we must make a determination into one of those other disability categories. And autism is definitely our fastest growing population in our district. Again, we provided you the percentage as well as the total count of our student population for those categories. On the next slide is we have to look at how we service our students in the educational environments under the Individuals with Disability Education Act and the regulations. You hear this as least restrictive environment, that's LRE. So in Prince George's County, the majority of our students are being served in general education environments, 80% or more of the time. And you see that we were at 72.8% as of October 1. You also see where we service other students. Our next highest category will be students who are in LREC, that's inside of general education, less than 40% of the time. Those are considered our self-contained programs. So we have roughly a little under 2,000 students that are serviced in self-contained programs. In our district, roughly about 14% of our student population are serviced there. We also, people may not realize, we also do service students in public-private day schools. Those are self-contained special education program placements. And we also service students in private separate day. Those are considered non-public program placements. We sometimes have students in correctional facilities and students that are parentally placed. So I wanted to kind of highlight those different categories for you. The next thing I wanted to share with you is our individualized education program monitoring results. And we are often looking at continuous improvement. I also want you to know that it is required by the United States Department of Education, as well as the Maryland State Department of Education under COMAR and the Individuals with Disability Education Act, that every local district has a systemic self-assessment and continuous improvement plan towards achieving our state performance indicators and to ensure that we're in full compliance with special education regulations. So what I'm going to do first is just describe kind of the process that we follow of how we actually review IEPs. The first approach is always through a desk audit. We're fortunate in the state of Maryland to be able to access an online system called the Maryland Online IEP system. And we're able to conduct random audits from a variety of standpoints, looking at accommodations, supplementary aids, IEP goals, and a variety of those requirements that go into implementing a student's IEP. We actually do a random selection across our district, both at the state level and at the district level, where we look at preschool, elementary, middle, and high school students. We have an IEP record review rubric that we actually use, along with entering that data in our Google Form system. And then we access those records through the Maryland Online system. We also take another approach, both at the state level and the district level, where we actually go in and observe. So we take a student, we randomly may take a student's IEP, We look at the supplementary aids, accommodations, the goals, the supports that are on that IEP, and we actually visit schools to actually see if we see those accommodations or supplementary aids being implemented during the instructional day. We also conduct interviews with principals, teachers, and even parents and students who are 14 years of age and older, and there's guiding questions that the state comes in and interviews our different stakeholder groups as well as us in terms of really looking at the application of the implementation of our IEP. So I just wanted to kind of explain that to you in terms of how we really review our records. The first set of slides I'm going to share with you is our Maryland State Department of Education monitoring results for 2018-19 as well as 2019-20 school year, so that you can get an idea of how we're doing in different categories. For IEP development, this is just a snapshot of some of the indicators that they look at. And then you're going to see an opportunity in just a moment of Prince George's County data of our self-monitoring. So you could see, for example, from 2018 to 2019 and then 19 to 20 for presence levels of performance. So they look at a variety of assessment results of the students, and we're looking to see that the area of impact that are indicated in those variety of assessment results or classroom observations are actually prevalent on the IEP, that we're looking at the student present levels. And you can see that we improved from 69% to 85%. Another big target area we look at is to ensure that the student's IEP goal is measurable. So again, we're looking for that connection between the present level of need that's indicated in the IEP and that we actually have a goal that measures it. So if a student in their IEP says that they're impacted around reading comprehension, then we would expect to see a reading comprehension goal in the goals section. So you could see we did improve from 79% to 90% of our IEP goals being measurable. Another area that I wanted to highlight is the IEP includes parental input. We have worked really hard with our schools teams to ensure that we're capturing the parental input on the student's IEP. If the character count, in terms of what the parent wants to share, we do have a character count limit. We've trained our teams to actually upload additional parent information if our character count, for example, exceeds. So in the past, sometimes school teams would say, well, we didn't add the parent input because we couldn't get all the information in a particular field of the IEP, but we have trained to make sure that we're uploading and we're taking into account the parental input as it relates to the IEP being developed or revised or implemented. And so you could see that we went from 69% up to 93% in terms of receiving that parental input and making sure that it's documented. Prince George's County has done, as you can see, a great job with providing those behavior needs for our students and making sure our IEP teams consider that. And so you could see we were at 100% in 18-19, and we maintained that from the state's review in 19-20. The other pieces I wanted to talk about around our monitoring is the IEP team process.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood the acronyms that you're saying. Do you mind just repeating those again, what IEP stands for? And just so that, and I'm sorry to cut you off, I just wanted to make sure.
Sure. So the IEP stands for the Individualized Education Program. So every student that's ages 3 through 21 in our state must have an individualized education program, otherwise known as an IEP. And this document really provides access to the general ed curriculum for our students to be able to access and progress in the general ed curriculum. So even for students who have significant disabilities, they must still have access to the extended state standards. One of the requirements under the Individuals with Disability Education Act, known as IDEA, says that we must have appropriate participants for an IEP team meeting. That may mean that if a student, of course, is in general education, we have a general education teacher that's part of that IEP team. This also means that we have to make sure that we have contacted the parent to participate in the IEP team meeting. If a student is receiving speech services or occupational therapy services, we must have that provider also attend the meeting. This also means that when a student in Maryland turns 14, that they have to be invited to their IEP team meeting. In the state of Maryland, we do that at 14. where a student is invited and we develop a secondary transition plan for students that are 14 and over. At the federal level, you'll see in other states, the federal regulations actually require students to participate at age 16. So that is something where we're a little different in Maryland that requires students to participate at 14. And so we're looking for documentation such as an IEP sign-in sheet that require participants have attended the meeting. So you could see we went from 84% to 95%. The other big piece around the process is we have to make sure that progress is evident, that we're completing progress reports quarterly. So in the state of Maryland, our progress reports are completed and provided to parents during the same reporting period as the grades for our students. And so each quarter, progress reports must also be submitted. We not only look at progress report if the student is making progress or not making progress. If they're not making progress, then we're looking for evidence that an IEP team meeting was convened to discuss that progress or make revisions or amendments to the IEP. We're also looking for data to ensure that what's written and evident in the progress report, that we have data that substantiates that progress. So that's another layer of the record review that we do to ensure that we're capturing that information in a narrative detail form so that the parent knows exactly how their student is performing. So it's about identifying certain sight words. We want to make sure that we list what those words are. If it's about really looking at text or reading comprehension questions, we want to make sure that we're really reviewing that for that particular parent. If it's math computation, single digits or double digits, that we're including that information of how the student is doing. So we did improve based on our state monitoring results and went from 79% to 92%. One of the other requirements is that our students must participate in statewide assessments, and we also must document those results within a student's IEP. And so that means that if a student, particularly at the high school level, has to complete English 10, a state assessment because they're enrolled in the English 10 course, and we're looking for evidence that they participated, and we have those results listed in the IEP. This is very critical because, as you know, at the high school level in particular, we're looking for and reviewing those graduation requirements in the context of that IEP meeting on an annual basis, and we're making sure that the student is progressing towards getting the necessary credits so that they can graduate with their diploma. So it's important that we're reviewing those statewide assessments. And you can see that evidence for our IEPs did improve from 62% to 77%. The other thing that we have to do as part of our IEP process is determine if a student qualifies for what we call extended school year services. So ESY stands for extended school year. And this is where we're looking to see if a student has critical life skills or has regression of his skills during the day, where we need to extend their school year for another month in our district. And so we do make decisions on that annually. And so we're looking for evidence and documentation that we've done that. And then you can see what those results show from 97% to 98%. And then the other big piece that we really emphasize is transition services, looking at college, career, and community ready. So every student, whether they're getting a diploma or a certificate of completion, must have a transition plan or transition services that talks about what will happen. Again, we begin that conversation at 14 in the state of Maryland to really discuss what those post-secondary outcomes may be. Part of this also includes a career inventory or looking at methods for students to really be able to express where they see themselves post-secondary. We're able to leverage a lot of resources in our district, such as the Naviance platform, that really gives an opportunity for our professional school counselors to really engage with our students who have IEPs around those post-secondary options. Are they going to go to community college, trade school? Are they going to work? If they're going to work, what are their areas of interest? And so we have a very robust transition auditing that we go through for each individual student to make sure that their transition plans are relevant and accurate and current. So you can see that we did improve based on our state monitoring results from 92% to 100%. I'll pause there to see if there's any questions before we move on.
All right, I'll go and others can feel free to chime in as well. So just thank you so much for this presentation and just sharing with us sort of some of this important monitoring data. I wanted to know if you could share, if we could go back a slide. All right. So I guess my question is more specifically around the results of the IEPs. So I'm really happy to see this great documentation here that, we're able to, get students to have parental involvement, that, we're 100%, getting, increasing and getting students to take these standardized assessments, and that the goals are meaningful and they're smart. This is awesome. But I guess I'm wanting to know a little bit more about sort of the other end of the IEP in terms of, what data do we have that would share a little bit about students actually meeting those IEP goals, right? Like, what percentage of students that have an IEP are meeting those goals? So that's one question. I'd like to know, what data do we have on the timeliness of the IEPs in terms of students being completed like in a timely manner? Do you have some data on that? So I'll start with those two questions.
So we definitely can follow up and give you specific data around progress reporting in terms of the number of students that have made progress on their IEP goals, or students who have not. So we are able to capture that through our data management office to be able to provide you with that data. So that could be definitely a follow-up item that we can bring back to you. In terms of the number of IEPs that are current and up to date, as of last Friday, we had 50 IEPs that were overdue in our entire district. So we do capture that data on a daily basis in terms of the number of IEPs that are overdue. So as of Friday, we had 50 that were actually overdue, because that's data that I look at definitely 2 to 3 times a week as part of our data dashboard.
And you're saying you can share with us in the future, or perhaps by next meeting, like how many, what is the percentage of IEP goal completion?
Right, so we could do a snapshot. It would be a
Okay.
snapshot in time. So we could look at, and we do the progress reports on a quarterly basis. So we could work with our data team to make that request of them, and then they could provide that data for us. Because they would have to generate that out of the Maryland online system. And we could do it by quarter. So each quarter we do our progress report. So for example, when our report cards, I believe we release them, I think it's early November, for example, we could actually provide that data at that time that gives you current up-to-date data.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, thank you. I think, you kind of got to the question that I was looking for as well, which is that, I think it's great to be able to see this data, but want to know essentially, like Ms. Adams Stafford said, more data that can kind of show the impact of these practices, particularly, and how effective our different tools are in supporting our students' development. So I think I'm just seconding that request for information, and I look forward to looking through it when it's sent over. Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to make sure. I think Board Member Valentine has his hand.
Just waiting for the chair to recognize me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was on mute.
No, and thank you, everybody. Since I've been on the board, as a board, we often get, communication from parents who have had issues around their child's IEP being fully implemented, the process in which, the meetings, everything that went into it. And so even when we see 85%, 90-some-odd%, oftentimes we hear about the 10% or the 15%. And oftentimes it's around just principals and staff understanding the procedures and accountability of those who don't So can you talk a little about the training and the development that goes into ensuring that school leaders are carrying things out to, with Fidelity, but also, how we are overseeing and making sure that no one falls through the gap. And I know 100% is hard, but
Mhm.
I will tell you, the 1 or 2 or 50 or whatever, we're going to hear about it. And I just
Sure.
want to make sure that as we're looking about policies or different funding, that we're looking at the whole picture, but also just where we can improve. And I imagine it's around PD, but other areas you think we can improve to ensure that we have the process of being carried out and there's accountability for those who don't do it.
Sure. I'm going to get a little bit into professional learning and just in a little bit later in the presentation, but in terms of systems and structures around monitoring, I would say that definitely we have a variety of ways that we look at monitoring our school teams. So one of the things that we do have is a special education checklist in which our special ed instructional specialist meets monthly with principals or their designee. That also may include if it's an autism program or autism specialist. Sometimes our compliance specialist is included, where we actually go over a variety of indicators for the principal or their designee to consider. One of the big pieces as we think about supplementary aids and services, we have several students in our district who are receiving interventions. So one of the things that we do is we do have an intervention fidelity monitoring tool in which we look at usage data in terms of the number of students that are accessing their interventions. We also go in and do observations of students. So even though we were in virtual or distance learning last year, we did actually go in virtually to look at and provide fidelity checks to make sure that based on the training that we provided to teachers, that they're implementing those interventions with fidelity. We provide office hours, coaching, et cetera. If we go in and see that a teacher maybe having some challenges or difficulty, but there is a variety just before they can actually implement the intervention of the training that we provide. And so we do use that monthly accountability kind of special ed checklist to go through our systems and structures. We also provide them with tools that help make the monitoring even easier for our principals and school teams. So they do get monthly reports related to the number of IEPs that are coming due within 30, 60, 90 days. They get data if IEPs are overdue. We also provide them with reevals, again, that are coming due. Reevaluation means we have to do that every 3 years for students, so take a look at them. So we do have some tools that we do provide to help with the accountability. If we go in and we see that there's a pattern or trend, we do use a rolling agenda. So we're able to review specific student cases we may have concerns with. If we are going in and we see observations and looking at our data that we have concerns, we do document that as part of our rolling agenda. And then what the expectation would be when we come back next month, we're seeing improvement. Sometimes we do provide support plans to schools if we see a pattern or trend. And sometimes, even though we have provided training and follow-up coaching, we do want to make sure that we're going in to support building the teacher's capacity. And you'll hear a little bit about that when we talk about our strategic plan and ways that we're doing that. So we do make sure that we provide that support. Some of our principals do not have a special ed background. So that responsibility and onus in making sure that our building leadership understands that is supported by central office, but we definitely have those systems and structures in place to really look at the accountability measures and the implementation of our IEPs.
One more point, Madam Chairwoman, particularly around language. In the past, again, we've had people come to talk about how particularly those parents who have English as a second language want to participate in the IEP process. And in some instances, there was not a translator. And so, I don't think it's a data point, but just a point of understanding, Madam Chairwoman, as I think with the budget process, making sure that whether it's someone who has that deficiency, if they have to literally just kind of go to that school, where the IEP is taking place, that language should not be a barrier for parents to be able to fully participate in the IEP process. But thank you very much.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask a question regarding the tests that you mentioned, the statewide tests. Can we get some data on how are our special education students performing on those tests? And specifically, what do we know about our special education students and graduation rates? And then lastly, have you all noticed any trends in any particular groups being overrepresented in special education? So are you noticing that we're seeing a trend in young black males or Latino males, or what are we noticing in terms of representation within the program?
So I think the first question, I know that Ms. Jamie Bowers, our Director of Testing, Research, and Evaluation, did provide the Academic Achievement Committee last fall with our performance data for students with disabilities. I know that data remains unchanged as of right now. I'm going to yield to Dr. White to make sure that what I'm saying is accurate.
It is accurate. We came last year and we broke down all of special education, and we broke down all of ESOL by demographics, by programs and different things. So I'll go back and look for that presentation. It may have been before, but I'll go back and pull that just so that I can provide it to you all so you can look at that. And then when we come back, if you have additional questions, once you look at it, we can answer those.
Mm-hmm. And then board member Ada Stafford, I will say for overrepresentation for Prince George's County, we are overrepresented for white students with speech disabilities. We're about 8%, a little over 8% of that population. We have to be, for a disproportionate identification, you have to be under 2%. And so for our speech only students that are white, we're at about 2.8%. We do have a targeted plan to address that. And then the other population where we are overrepresented is for African-American students that have an emotional disability. So that's our other category, and we're at about 3.48%. So 1.48% over the 2% threshold for our district. And we do have a plan to address that particular population. We've worked with the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education, as well as the Maryland State Department of Education. We did a self-assessment where we looked at that particular population of students. And so we have solicited some outside organizations to help look at our data and provide us with strategies in particular to address that particular population of students. So those are the two areas that were overrepresented.
And the good thing is,
I'd see that.
Yeah, the state does an oversight of disproportionality in many areas. And so Chanel can tell you exactly how many, but it's a lot. And so for
96.
It's 96 areas that they look at us over disproportionality. And those are the two areas that we were over. So we had to build a plan for them. So I just say that to say that, no, it's constantly on our radar because it's constantly a data point that we have to look at, see, address, reflect on, and really build out a plan on how we get better.
So thank you so much. And one thing I just want to ask, how I think that special education is probably the number one sort of concern that parents voice to me, like when I'm out and when I was, endeavoring to become an elected official. And I'm wondering how often, I know that you mentioned that you all get an opportunity to get some qualitative feedback from families and parents, but how often do you get an opportunity to really talk to and get, is there like a buds person office where people can share, some of their challenges with special education?
Absolutely. So we do, we're fortunate to have 4 staff members who staff our Family Support Center. We have an instructional specialist, a program coordinator, a parent liaison who's bilingual, and a social worker now. Parent engagement is part of our strategic plan and is of utmost importance that we really support our parents. And so, yes, they have an opportunity to follow up. We have our Family Support Center staff that actually attends IEP meetings, helps parents understand the process. Any new family that's identified in our district for a student who has a disability, the Family Support Center makes immediate contact within 60 days, provides a welcome letter, parent contact information, and invites them to a workshop just to let them know who they are, how they will be supporting them as a new family of a child with a disability. And we've been doing that now for the last 3 years. We also do a parent survey. The Maryland State Department of Education does do a parent survey for our infants and toddler program, as well as our school age program. And so that is another opportunity for parents to provide their feedback. We take that feedback and really tailor either workshops or support groups to really address their needs. And so we do send out each school year in the fall, we do send out flyers and information to our families so that they know about the Family Support Center and what we can do to support them through the IEP process, decision making, et cetera. So we definitely have ways to really support them. We also, probably about 4 years ago, in all of our IEP settings and as part of our IEP process, we do provide parents with their parental safeguards, of course, at least annually, and ways to resolve disagreements. And then we're really focusing training and emphasis on parents as our partners and how to engage parents in the IEP process. Many times when parents are upset or have concerns, is sometimes they don't feel heard. And so we really are doing a whole series on how can you be a better active listener and really listen to your families, hear what they're saying. Sometimes we know that we have deadlines, we have things that we have to get through, but parents sometimes just want to be heard and want to hear and understand that people are hearing them out. Sometimes at the end of the day, what parents are asking for or what the schools can provide, sometimes there is challenges with that, but we want to make sure that we are listening to our families, making sure that we're resolving. And a lot of times, when things get to my level or supervisor's level or to Dr. White's level, when you go back and you really dig deeper, trust has been broken at some point in that with that school team. Parents did not feel heard. We didn't get back to them in a timely manner. So those are things that we really stress and emphasize to our special education chairpersons and our coordinators, who are many times kind of the front of point of contact and working with our families to resolve those matters. So we do definitely have a way to resolve those complaints with our family through our Family Support Center.
Thank you so much. So I know we do have 2 other topics because we had to combine some things this evening. But if you wanted to keep going with your presentation, Ms. Bowman, and then we
Sure.
can move into acceleration and remediation, Dr. White.
Yes. The next few slides, I want to get to kind of the literacy and the professional learning and our strategic plan. I did provide you with the 2019-20 PGCPS IEP results. Again, the state does a monitoring, but we also monitor ourselves so that you can see what some of that data looks like. Our in count in terms of the number of students that we monitor is a lot greater. The state looks at about 80 schools. We look at every single school. So our data is reflective of every single school in our district in terms of looking through the IEP development lens. And you could see those areas in which we need to definitely improve in. We updated our monitoring structure and changed it for the 1920 school year. And we just wrapped up our 2021 school year. So part of that end of the report that we'll share at the end of this particular school year, we'll look at our data from 1920 versus 2021. So this is our Prince George's County data, again, in those same areas that the IEP are monitored for MSTE. After IEP monitoring is complete, we always share the results with our principals. We share trends, data, patterns, and areas of improvement. Based on that, IEP meetings may need to be reconvened. IEPs may need to be updated. So if we see that there's an area of compliance, it may require an IEP meeting to be held. We also look at professional learning and coaching to address those targeted areas. And then we also have our central office teams that may work with those IEP team members to make sure that those items are uploaded or updated. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that we do have a Department of Special Education strategic plan, and we are focused on 3 different goal areas. One is enhancing the delivery of our special ed services, improving and rethinking how we provide those services to our students. Goal 2 is really anchored in our integrated system of general supervision around monitoring the implementation of our IEPs. And the 3rd is really looking at professional learning and coaching to build our teacher capacity around those evidence-based practices and specially designed instruction. I just wanted to highlight for goal 1, 2, and 3, just some highlights of the strategic plan. But for goal 1, it's really thinking how we're providing services with a keen focus on students with autism, students who have social, emotional, or behavior needs, and students with specific learning disabilities. By looking at our partnerships with community partners to really strengthen our service delivery models. We not only want to strengthen them, but we also want to develop and have an evaluation method to evaluate how do we know that we're doing a good job, right? How do we know that we're providing those services? So we are working with our testing, research, and evaluation department to really look at a monitoring system to be able to reevaluate. We have a great staffing committee that supports the Department of Special Education, and we have been working the last couple of years to really look at our staffing models and resources and how we may be able to rethink and leverage those staffing models to better meet the needs of our students and our schools. For goal 2, again, really thinking through that integrated general supervision monitoring. We know the state monitors us, we monitor ourselves, but then also we want to build the capacity of our school teams on how they can implement systems and structures to implement and monitor IEPs at their school. What we know based on a pilot of those schools that participated in our pilot, when we piloted with about 4 schools, is that when they have the ownership of their monitoring structures and systems in their school, you can see a remarkable improvement in those results of their school. When they understand the rubric, what we're looking for, then you definitely can see that marked improvement. We also are looking at a differentiated framework of tiered systems. We know that we have unique systems in schools. We can't always support them the same. And so we really want to make sure that we're looking at how we can build a differentiated framework of how we can support our schools based on their data metrics. So we're looking at 3 different tiers. We're working with Hanover Research to help us come out with a logic model to evaluate our schools based on their data, a variety of compliance, performance data. Not only looking as the IEP compliant, but also looking at the outcomes of performance data. They will help us do that logic model. We'll be doing focus groups with our school administrators, school teams, parents, bringing them in to really talk about how do we look at supporting schools differently from the Department of Special Ed. And then we'll be releasing an annual special ed report card that really shares the academic performance and compliance data so that schools begin to see where their data is and how they can make improvements around improving those academic and compliance outcomes for our students. Goal 3 is again anchored in that professional learning and coaching to build our teacher capacity, really looking at, we know what the strategies are, so it's not a rocket science to say we have to come up with what works best for students with disabilities. We have a long-standing national research that shows us what those best strategies are. We want to really work with our curriculum and instruction office, which we've done a great job really updating our district curriculum frameworks to reflect specially designed instruction and how you plan for that, and then implement professional learning plans with toolkits related to a variety of stakeholder groups. We've already rolled out training for our parents around how they support specially designed instruction at home, and then also using Fidelity checklists to really support and evaluate our evidence-based strategies. So not to be punitive in the evaluation teacher for process for teachers, but to really build their capacity around the co-planning. So how do you co-plan your lessons for specially designed instruction? How do you implement them? And then how do you evaluate that process? So those are just some highlights for goal 3. What we're doing in the Department of Special Ed to support our literacy is really through our specially designed instruction. And this slide just provides you a variety of things that we're working, really joint partnership with our curriculum and instruction, with our reading and mathematics supervisors to really create professional learning. The great thing about our partnership is where you see them, you see us. So when we actually roll out training in our curriculum frameworks, we have representatives from the special ed department that's right there with the curriculum and instruction supervisors and specialists to really look at the considerations around instructional planning and those core content areas in the curriculum. We also partner with our local and national mathematics and reading experts to really dig deeper for special ed teachers and understanding the mathematics and content standards, as well as those evidence-based instructional strategies. We participate with the area office, as well as with our curriculum office and ourselves around instructional learning walks to really be able to provide targeted assistance. And then we also work again through our training and coaching around how do you co-plan, co-implement, and co-evaluate literacy through the lens of literacy through the specially designed instruction. This is just an example of what is sitting in our curriculum framework documents now, which are the instructional considerations around collaborative planning. We really want the general ed and special ed teacher planning together, really taking those IEP snapshots, thinking about a student's accommodations and supplementary aids, making sure that we have documentation and evidence of those things being implemented, really thinking about our evidence-based intervention and how we can look at those particular areas of a student's need as we plan for them. And so we have put in kind of a checklist for teachers to look at as they're planning, using our curriculum documents and text resources to really plan for that. So that's part of that presentation that we do with our curriculum and instruction counterparts to make sure that we are talking about how do you plan for students with disabilities in your classrooms. Our professional learning are kind of calibrated in these particular categories. And underneath these different categories, a variety of topics around behavior support. So how do you look at the development of a functional behavior assessment, keeping data for that? How do you develop an intervention plan and track that? Family engagement, secondary transition, and so on and so forth. So you can see those big buckets. And then we also have an additional, we've been able to leverage Victor Solutions to provide about 62 modules for our teachers and paraprofessionals. One of them is around universal design for learning that we provide in terms of our e-system. And there's about 13 broad categories that results in, again, 62 different modules. So thank you for the opportunity to share what we're doing in the Department of Special Education and the Division of Academics.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm so glad that last slide that you shouted out UDL, because I was getting I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't see anything about UDL, and that's the main question I have. So that's great to hear. Are they only accessing that through modules, or are they is that part of professional learning as well, doing UDL training?
Yes, so they do have that in part of our curriculum frameworks. And I know Dr. White, as our different counterparts come from our Division of Academics, they're going to be highlighting that. So I'll let Dr. White kind of speak to that. Yes.
So one of the things I forgot to mention when we talked about the work plan is that I put a note at the bottom that every content team that comes will talk about professional development and UDL. So it wouldn't have to live like in this isolated place, but we could show you the direct correlation that we do across every content.
Okay, and thank you so much. And I guess one question that I'm just not really seeing or understanding. So are you saying that as of right now, we don't have necessarily a multi-tiered system of support framework? That's what you're developing with Hanover Research? Because, what I think would be extremely beneficial would be to have, a clear sort of MTSS framework that all of this lives in, and that we can clearly see it just in one sort of ongoing. But what I'm taking from this is that this is part of the strategic plan, but it's not necessarily a framework that is a PGCPS specific framework of how we do multi-tiered system of support. Is that what you're developing with Hanover Research?
So with Hanover, we're looking at how to tier schools in 3 different levels. So basically we're looking at, if you're a universal tiered school, what are the supports that you get versus if you were an intensive school? So we're utilizing that framework around performance metrics data. So looking at performance data of students with disabilities and compliance data, and tiering how we support the schools. Does that make sense?
Which is different than what she's asking. So what we do have, what you're asking, it falls under our student services side. And they're going to come and speak about that. What we're trying to do is leverage how we use our current staff. So right now, let's just say, for example, if I have one cluster of schools and they have one special education instructional specialists. We're trying to look within that cluster to see how the schools fare out. And instead of giving equal time to every school, give tiered so that the school who's struggling hitting all of their markers, the school who's struggling hitting where they have compliance issues or brand new teachers, that we're allowing that person's time to be divided by tiers. So the most intensive in the places that need it the most.
Yeah, I'd be interested to explore that a little bit more. I'll just say this, what I'm seeing at the state level and nationally are that schools that have an MTSS system embedded, like within a district, every school having that MTSS framework and having like real clarity about what that means in moving students through those tiers, and that being sort of like a very strong like district emphasis. I'm seeing a lot of success there, and I do see what you all are doing, and I understand what you just said, Dr. White, but it may be worth checking out how MTSS can come to the school level to support students. And I do hear what you're saying, though, about your strategy, though. So of course, I don't mind sharing some of those resources. I wanted to move, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Appreciate you. If there aren't any other questions, I think we can move into the next section, which was, help me out, Aisha, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes. I think it's remediation and acceleration.
I have culturally responsive curriculum.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can go there. Is it just me? I can't hear Dr. White. Dr. White, are you muted?
She's muted.
Okay.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. Let me start it over. You missed all the wonderful things I was saying, but I'm gonna start over. So what I wanted to provide a lens for is where we've been since October 2020. And so last year was my first year as the chief. And prior to that, we did not have an equity office, and that equity office was established actually right before the pandemic. So in 2020, right before the pandemic happened, and they spent time talking about equity, administrative procedures, board policy, in different pieces. So as we've tried to make that work alive in our department, I just wanted to kind of lay out where we've been since October 2020, and then gladly we'll answer questions. So for us, we've definitely been checking on bias, courageous conversations, and culturally responsive teaching. And you'll see here where I just listed pretty much the vision and mission of what we've done, and really looking at a lot of the social justice pieces that were happening. And we really were driving that work originally a lot through our social studies classrooms. It was a very easy platform to do, to get our students to start really being critical in how they thought and having voices in our classrooms. But we realized that it's so many other pieces that we're trying to build a plan for, and how to move forward with them and with us. And so one of the things that we all know, whenever you're dealing with talking about culturally responsive teaching, just bias, the brain and how that works, is we really have to spend time with individuals who engage really understanding that work. And so Dr. Golson had several book studies, but the one book study that our team did this last year, we spent a whole year, and I'll share a little bit more about that, was on culturally responsive teaching in the brain with Zaretta Hammond and some of her work. And so our whole school system, if you signed up, had an opportunity to engage in some of the other book studies, but if you didn't sign up, you really weren't getting it. And so we tried to really figure out where is a starting point. But one of the things I was really clear about is that you can't have any individual out just talking about culturally responsive teaching, really talking about bias. If you yourself haven't had a moment to stop, reflect, do survey for yourself, where are you? What do you bring to the table? What is your voice? And how do you represent that topic? Which was thus the need for a book study. So in school year 2020-2021, we did a 6-part study. We talked about implicit bias for academics. We did the Ready for Rigor framework when we talked about different levels of culture. We really looked at brain functions and culturally responsive teaching and what that means. So, you know, how do we look at our own curriculum and how do we assess where we are and what we've written and what we put before students? And that led to part 4, where we really did an audit tool and really tried to find an audit tool that would be best for us to go back and look at the textbooks that we're using, or rather the novels that our kids have in their hands, and how we're presenting information to teachers and how we're kind of talking to teachers about what they're using in their classrooms. From there, we went to a part 5 where we really looked at the learning environment and we talked about tools to look at, you know, how are we building our classrooms for success around that? And then awareness in the audit curriculum. And so we decided that we wanted to spend time looking at a targeted professional development. And what we created was across academics is made up of 6 areas. And so we pulled leads from all 6 areas, as well as our equity department. And that team built out this professional development all year long. In addition to that, we looked for many people across the district and we did a targeted professional development book study for those leads and for other individuals within our district with Zaretta Hammond. So it was almost a 6-month professional development, very targeted, a lot of work, just because we felt that we really need to build the bandwidth within our district to figure out the best way to roll out implementations, to really talk to staff, to really support the equity office from the lens of academics and how we start the conversation with our schools. So one of the things that we agreed upon was this 4 agreements of courageous conversations. And we kind of talked about this a lot in social studies, but when crisis happens in the world, or when students show up in our classrooms, ranging from different demographics, socioeconomic backgrounds, we really wanted students to have voices in our classroom. And so we spent time talking about the 4 agreements of courageous conversation. So working to stay engaged, teaching people to speak your truth, teaching people to experience discomfort, which we know can be difficult even for us as adults. And then what do we expect and accept in non-closure? And so we took these 4 topics. We spent a lot of time throughout the year breaking them apart. We talked about how they could be introduced to our teachers so that whenever there was opportunities for voice to be had in the classroom, that we would work down a series of platforms on how to get our students to understand the 4 agreements of courageous conversations to make it a safe place to do so. So then what we did, make sure. So what we did next was we looked at her Ready for Rigor framework. And so she has 4 quadrants in the Ready for Rigor framework. But as we wanted this year to start working with our schools, we looked at the area of awareness. And so we said, what's the easiest way to start to really get teachers to understand, and how do we support the equity work that was done? So last year, it was a professional development day. The entire system participated in an activity where we talked about bias. October 1 this year, our whole system will engage in an equity process as well. And so we wanted to think through what could we do around the area of awareness. So when you think about awareness, it's really knowing and owning your own cultural lens, understanding the 3 levels of culture, really understanding how the brain learns and how we put kids in a fight or flight situation based on what goes on in the classroom, really talking through how do you build a culture in a classroom that's safe and not trigger students, because we know that if students are triggered, if they stay constantly in a fight mode, it becomes very difficult for them to take in information and to learn. So this year we went through at the beginning of the year and really got everybody to understand. So how's your cultural background and beliefs shape who you are as a person? And it was really interesting to hear the dialogue and the conversations that our teams had. And I definitely identified that had we rolled out as a curriculum office and not been responsible to do this level of work first, it could have really been a dangerous platform for us to roll out and have an expectation for teachers when we couldn't support it, stand up to it, push back in certain scenarios, and really be supportive of the work. So I'm glad that we spent time doing that, because if you don't have self-awareness, it's hard for you to challenge others to be aware, to really understand what that means and how it can shape and form a classroom. So we took our curriculums and we grounded it. So what we did was every curriculum team just took the audit tool and wanted to kind of just get a rough gauge of where we are. Like that's one of the first steps is where we are, so we can kind of identify where we wanted to move. The other thing that we did is, and we already do this in one way in our textbook adoption process, but whenever we bring on new textbooks, we take our teams through diversity to really look at what's there. We took that a step further by challenging the textbook companies we use to actually even provide to us where does culturally responsive teaching show up, give us specific examples, and really allows us to hone in with our textbook adoption groups to determine, which tool is the best, what tool represents us, what tool represents our students that sit before us. And then we thought, as we begin to work with teachers, the first thing we wanted to do was to roll out questions in our lesson plan guides that they use. So many of our different contents use different lesson plan templates. So we picked 3 focus questions in our lesson plan template that would cause teachers to do some self-reflection as they're planning, to really think through, do I have a bias about what I'm about to teach? Or, how have I engaged? Or who are the students that are sitting before me? So we put that in every single lesson plan template across the district. We did that, not just, people think about core content, but we did that in everything that we teach. Even if you're in music, what genres of music do you play? Are you exposing our kids to, and really getting people to really understand and go back and look. And so here were the questions that we chose to put in our documents. So in what ways does this lesson give students opportunities to contribute their prior knowledge about their identity, culture, and their experiences with the topic? Are you developing this lesson, or as you're developing this lesson, what content or concepts might trigger you or don't align with your personal beliefs? And the reason that's relevant is because a lot of times we teach standards that the state says we have to teach, but we also know that there could be times and opportunities where teachers are teaching certain standards and it can be a boiling point for themselves. So do they skip things? Do they not teach it because they're not comfortable with it? And so really just bringing awareness to that. And then the last one, what are you going to do to ensure that these triggers don't result in an amygdala hijack for yourself or for your students? So how do you mitigate that to make sure that kids really get what they should intended to receive? And so at the beginning of the year, one of the things that we really strive to do is we have an opportunity. The first week, all of our teachers come back for mandatory. It is the one day where every teacher has to participate in mandatory professional development training. So what we created was a slide deck for every content that was presenting, to present the same slides around culturally responsive teaching. That way we knew that systemically it wasn't you were exposed because you wanted to do the volunteer book study, or you were exposed because somebody happened to be in a training, but this way we touched every single teacher. And in addition to that, we pre-recorded it so that there was a teacher that missed it, they would have an opportunity to go back and watch it. And if you were there and present, but you still want to kind of spend more time in it, you can always go back and watch it. I think for us as a department and as a system is really trying to make sure that our teachers and our students are comfortable in their space, is to really look at the culture. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit. We talk about even acceleration versus remediation, is what do we expect our kids to bring to the table? And do we give them room to be themselves? And do we give them voice for that resiliency to share who they are and their prior knowledge? And do we make that classroom comfortable where they're able to share in a courageous way without feeling penalized? And are we able to give our teachers the thought of teaching and really self-checking? What we found is that a lot of people teach things and we didn't self-check. We didn't have people going through and analyzing where we are. But what we've identified is that everybody has some form of bias on certain situations, and how do you deal with that before you end up engaging with students. And so for our own team, what we created was a culturally responsive resource site where we're housing all of our documents. And then we're working with the equity office to talk through what are those next steps in equity. What are those next steps around a toolkit for our teachers to have as they're working? What are our next steps to look at our documents to determine, even when we look at our novels, for example, in reading language arts, one of the things we have to think about is how many of our materials are written for the students who sit in front of us, right? The color of their skin. How many of them, or how many authors are writing about a white author writing about an experience for an African-American student. So that kind of tool, we wanted to spend time really seeing like, what do we have and where are we missing the mark? This week, we're going to be talking about, the equity office is talking about transgender and our new administrative procedure. And so for the first time, it's really giving this audience to say what do we have and what are we missing? And how do we fill in the gaps? And as we think about our budget implications to that, is how do we put some of our resources to the areas that we're missing so that every student in our district is represented. So that was kind of where we started. Again, and board member Adam Stafford, clearly, like we could have said, oh, culture responsive teaching, we're throwing this, we're dropping this on every teacher, we're doing this, this, and this. But if we didn't take time to reflect in what I watched that experience for the entire year, and every month my entire team met, and it was difficult conversations. And, we can't make an assumption that even the people who write the curriculum and people who are vetting the test, that we have all gone through that experience. And so, I'm definitely of the mindset that when we roll things out, we've got to roll it out right. When we roll it out, we got to make sure that the culture supports what we're trying to do and that our teachers feel supported. And I definitely didn't want to put them in a situation where we're asking so much without providing the professional development they need, without providing the resources, and to really just check yourself on who are you showing up as every day? Who are you showing up for our students? Do you value the students in your class? Do you call on your girls more than you call on your boys? Do you walk into a math class automatically assuming that your young ladies are going to know it before your young men? The young man that walks into your class whose pants are hanging low, do you already make an assumption that they can't answer when they might be the smartest child in the room? So we try to really break apart and frame that so that we're moving in the right direction culturally for our kids and to be able to support their voice. I think when you think of all the social unrest that we had all year long, like in the middle of the pandemic, I think it really helped propel us to start having those difficult conversations and for our teachers to begin to engage in topics that they never would have probably, for some of them, engaged in. So that's just where we are. My goal is to be building an equity plan for my particular department on what are our next steps and where do we want to go? Where do we want our teachers to live? And what do we want our documents to look like? Before I touch documents, I want to make sure that our attitudes and our dispositions and what we put before children are the correct thing.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Dr. White, for that presentation. That just warms my CRT heart. That's like the best news I've heard all day. And just to see the strategic rollout, it's really encouraging. My question is about evaluation, right? So we do these workshops, we do them, we dig in, we do the courageous conversations, and then we know a lot of times folks go to their rooms, close the door, and do what they've done before. And so I want to know, how do we plan to leverage tools like the CRIOP? I'm familiar with this out of University of Kentucky, the culturally responsive observation protocols.
Yeah.
How can we embed that in our current evaluations to make sure that people are actually doing this really important work? Because I love the integration with the lesson planning. And I'm wondering, like, what is our ultimate goal here? Because when it's measured, then it gets done, right?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because originally when we were fighting against this was last year, and we hadn't done Zaretta Hammond's work yet. And so I said, well, we use framework for teaching. So let's go in and see what's in the framework for teaching. And it already actually lays out several components. This year, we wanted to really ramp it up. Like, let's really put questions in there that's going to get to the heart of the matter. And so one of our next steps is to work to look at where does that show up in what we're currently using. So framework teacher has really explicit things, but not where does it show up, really providing our administrators and those who do observations. So what would you be looking for? Because if you don't even understand that part, it could really be there, but you're not looking for it because you haven't seen examples to know what specifically to look for. So that's one of our next level of work too, is to work with that top department and try to identify, even if we stayed in one domain, what specifically can we look at across the entire district to say across the entire district we're growing? A lot of times I try to go, you'll hear me always start small versus big, because if I said, oh, in every domain and in every component, there's this and this and this, but why don't we look for two? If we can get the two mastered and we can get evaluations, and then we can look at the evaluation data and see where it shows up, then we know, like, we got that, let's move to the next thing. So that is part of our next level work.
Awesome. No, I definitely will shoot you over what I was mentioning, the
Sure.
prior protocol, maybe
Sure.
able to be connected.
That would be
Go ahead, Aisha.
Hi, I know I'm not generally supposed to be speaking during these meetings, but I absolutely had to say this. Work is not being done everywhere. It's not being done everywhere. So I wanted to thank you and your team. I live in another county. And so if I could just get 10 seconds to tell this quick story. Since we were, in the pandemic, my child was, learning from home, as most children were in the beginning. And so I had the opportunity to see some of the work come home that she might have been getting at school. I would have never seen these handouts. I would have never, even heard about these lessons. So a couple of social studies handouts came home that were so triggering. We're talking about early America, specifically slavery, and some of the just misinformation. I mean, I'm no historian, but I do know that, some of the things that were in there, it was misinformation.
Yeah.
I said all of that to say thank you all for this work, because this is not something that everybody's doing. This it's so important, it's needed, it's innovative, and thank you.
Yeah. And it's not an easy work. It's really not. And one of the things that we quickly identified is that our social studies team was being hit hard because, again, as things were going on in the world, they were the response, right? So they were creating lessons for our schools, so our teachers didn't have to think about it. Also, when you have standards in social studies, teachers can teach around the standards. So we also realized that we had some people, well, I'm going to skip talking about that because I'm not comfortable talking about that, right? So one of the things that we also are going to be doing is we working on RFP to do have our social studies curriculums audited, because we want to see for the kids that sit in front of us, did we miss moments? Did we miss some specific things in our curriculums from our littlest ones all the way up through high school, where we missed opportunity to talk about us, the kids that we have in our district, to tell that story. And so, I just knew that when I looked at my own team, same way we went in the pandemic and we assumed, oh yeah, we're in the pandemic, let's flip the curriculum and do technology. That made an assumption that we all knew the proper pedagogy. So just because we know standards, it's a level of learning there. I never want to be not responsible in how we roll something out to say we checked it off and we did it, versus a way that may take us a little longer, but we're being very responsible to the kids who sit in front of us. And with this also becomes a different parent conversation, right? So as a system, when we put out an equity policy and a board policy that says, and I remember at the board meeting, you all were just talking about the policy that you're looking at, that comes with some things when now we send certain things home and other parents are going to say, why are you talking about that? Right. And so it's about teaching everyone that we're going to be a school district where voices are heard. We're going to be a school district that deals with conversations that are not comfortable, but we're going to teach our children how to talk through that. And we're going to teach our teachers to love our kids enough to allow them to show up as themselves and work through that. And that can get a little muddled, and it's not always comfortable, but it's necessary to address where we are right now.
Thank you. Board Member Valentine, and then we're going to move into the next section on acceleration versus remediation.
Thank you, and thank Aisha for her comment. It sounds like she's looking for a realtor to move to Prince George's County. But thank you again for this conversation. I think there are two sort of topics that are, to me, inextricably linked to this. And one is, teacher diversity. And so who is actually teaching the curriculum? And I think we do a very good job of recruitment, but obviously retention, and particularly recruitment and retention of Latino and Latina educators, because we have a growing population, and are those students seeing themselves not only in the curriculum but in those who are bringing the curriculum to them? And the second part is the autonomy that those teachers have to bring their full selves to the curriculum. Oftentimes, districts really hamstring educators to have to teach from the same blueprint that every other teacher in the district is teaching, and they're not able to bring their own experience to it. And so can you talk a little bit about sort of, how all this is intertwined with the recruitment and retention of our served, underrepresented groups, but
Sure. So,
also how much autonomy are we giving these educators to? I'm done.
Sure. So, and Dr. Murphy would be an absolute best advocate to speak for. I know we had an ELL work group, and she came and she talked a lot about the recruitment efforts and what they do. And Board Member Valentine, I will grab that information because they actually do a lot to really think through who's here. And a part of that work group, they had to identify how many Hispanic administrators do we have, how many Hispanic, they went through the gamut of that. So I'll definitely go back and grab those responses and provide that. But in speaking about the curriculum, one of the things that we try to do, and we're one of the few districts that do this, is we write curriculum, right? So, but we write curriculum with the understanding that here is the cookbook. And I'm sure if all of us made chili on this call, we would all be adding something a little bit different. Like we wouldn't line them up and everybody's chili would taste the exact same way. But did we tell you certain ingredients that you need to make the chili? Yes. Maryland has certain standards that we have to hit. So we build out our framing, we build out how they should get there. We build out, here is examples. And now that we're moving into our Canvas platform, this year we even built out an exemplary course at elementary, middle, and high school 1 for every content to show them this is what makes a good model classroom. Now, we're also going to be building out different modules along the way over the year, finding different videos they can use, but we absolutely give them room to bring in other things that are of interest as long as they're hitting the rigor of the standard. And so we talk to teachers about that a lot. What we don't want is teachers way off. They're not at the rigor of the standard and they're not teaching what's appropriately aligned to the standard. So we build a lot for them. But we absolutely allow them to use it like a cookbook and to add their twists and spins and to talk about, their experiences, what they've gotten there, because we value that they are all trained educators that know how to do that work and how to do it well.
But also this one last point, I think there's some who do it better than others.
True.
And think about our recruitment. We don't do, tell me if we do, ask those who are applying to do like a mock lesson. I know Wilmer Thomas is on, I know TFA does that. But the idea that, we would ask them to sort of say, can you do this? And then if those who can't, how do we train them up to be able to bring themselves to this? Because some are used to just being kind of robotic.
Correct. I agree. And again, I'm not sure. I know that in our administrative process, they are some tasks that they are asked to do and come and speak about and be able to share through. Whether they do that with teachers or not, that I'm not sure. But Christy Murphy, I will gladly take that question back.
So I think we're running up against the clock here. Thank you so much for that point there about CRT. However, I do want to talk very briefly, if we can, about acceleration versus remediation and really thinking about a roadmap to how we're going to support students that are dealing with learning loss. And I'm not sure if there's a way that we can receive some type of report from any of the end of the year exams or diagnostic exams that have happened to know, how our students are faring right now. I know that other districts have released that information to say, okay, this is where we are. This is the data. Sure. This is our plan for, bringing those students on to grade level.
Yeah. So at the end of the year, the only assessments we would have taken at the end of the year would have been more of our benchmarks for certain grades. But I know that they pulled that information together. Know that we're going to be taking fall MCAPs, and that window is open right now. And those students taking those fall MCAPs are being tested on last year's standards. So that's probably going to be more in the immediate, and we should have that data pretty soon because we're in the window right now. So we'll go back and look at that. Rarely when you all hear me talk, do you ever hear me say learning loss. You'll rarely ever hear me say that. You will always hear me say interrupted education, interrupted learning, unfinished learning. And let me share a little bit why I say that. We know in the past, before we ever hit a pandemic, when we used to talk about learning loss, we talked about going from fall, ending in the spring and starting back in the fall. And we knew that there were certain kids that a summer absence of staying engaged in the work created this kind of loss. Like there were some skills, if you test the kids at the end, it started like, kids have been hanging out all summer, not engaged in the work, and it could create like, oh, we got to catch you back up kind of thing. But when we talked about the pandemic, what I try to stay away from is making our kids believe that they've lost something, because they haven't. What happened is that we had interrupted instruction. That happened for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is because we simply didn't get to it because our class schedules no longer look the same. So if you had math in a regular year and that math was 90 minutes, but now we couldn't keep you 90 minutes every day because we had to know that you were at home, you needed a break on the computer. Instead of going deep, we went wide. So interrupted instruction could be because we covered some topics. We didn't cover all the topics we normally would. We went wider and we didn't go as deep as we normally would. You just simply weren't exposed to some things which would have created an interrupted instruction. So there are going to be some students that will come right back in. And because Maryland does a great job with their standards and they spiral, every year builds on the other. So you'll hear us a lot of times talked about the bridging forward guys that we did that first 3 weeks. The intent of that was to say, what are the major concepts that kids need as they bridge from their last grade into the new grade in reading, math, science, and social studies. And we spent the first 3 weeks going through those skills. Some schools take a little longer than 3 weeks, but we try to go back and give a foundation to every student in the core content. We also know that our standards spiral. So we say, where will we see that again? Where's the opportunity for that again? And so when we talk about remediation and we talk about acceleration, it can show up in different ways. So we're always going to be in a place of acceleration for every kid. I don't care who you're talking about. I don't care where they are in our district. We're going to always be in a place of acceleration simply because it's our role and responsibility to engage every student at the grade level content everywhere, inclusive of our students with IEPs. When she talked about the individual education programs being written, they have to be written at the grade level standard, and we have to then teach teachers how to scaffold back. So I don't say, oh, you're in 3rd grade and you're on a 1st grade level. I'm going to give you your goal at a 1st grade level. I have to give you your goal at the 3rd grade level and then talk through how I spiral back to fill the gap, right? And so we have core instruction. I want you to think about it. If I was to kind of core instruction is in the center. For kids that get it quickly and they move on, we move and then we can extend. From the extension, we accelerate. But if you're in the core and there are certain gaps that exist, we may have to take you to intervention, which then can lead to remediation. But every single kid that we have will have form of acceleration because we're going to always talk to you from the standard. And then that's why we spend time. You'll hear us talk about universal screenings. You'll hear us talk about interim assessments, which is what board member Adams is talking about. You'll hear us talk about formative assessments. What are those individual checks in the curriculum that we're looking for to really spend time with students to identify where gaps exist? When we start identifying with those gaps, we were able to use our ESSER funds to make sure that we didn't just buy a variety of like, oh, I'm just going to hand pick because this vendor called and this vendor called. We start looking at, okay, if it's a phonemic awareness issue or if it's certain issues, what's the best interventions that we can buy that help kids on the individual track close some of those while we're also forging ahead. And so we spent a good amount of time of researching. We made sure that we looked at the ESSER ratings. Is it a strong rating? Has it shown proof and evidence that it can work? And we spent time doing that. Go ahead, you had a question?
Yeah, no, when you're saying the ESSER ratings, are you talking about like an ed report rating in terms of like the high quality of the curriculum or a different rating?
So Ed, we do look at those, especially when we're buying curriculums, but according to the state of Maryland, we have to tier. There are tiered interventions that we have to use. And so we try to stay, they're tiered 1 through 4, with 1 being the strongest, all the way to where 4 is, we're going to try it. There's really no research. We are the research. We try to stay in the 1, 2, potentially fall into the 3, but definitely the 1, 2, because they've been shown proven to be productive and with students that they work. And so then we built time in. The other thing we identify when you talk about acceleration versus remediation is that kids get better because we talk to them and we build the efficacy of what they can do, and we talk to them through their own goals. So this year, while last year we talked about that Wednesday and we did different in small groups, we didn't do that. But what we did do was create a Wow Wednesday. So we're working on winning, where our teachers spend time talking through the curriculum with kids. They spend time meeting with students individually to get kids to own their data, because we want to build kids who can hold their own conferences, who can do student-led conferences, who can talk about where they are and where they need to grow and what they need to do to change. The moment kids are able to verbalize that and you build that culture in that classroom, then we're building kids to take some ownership and begin to, work through that together. So the 4 areas that we do those on those Wednesdays, they can revisit concepts, they can review them, they can re-engage, or they can revise. And so data is relevant to us because we constantly should be looking at individual students and where they're growing, what the data suggests, and where the gaps still exist. And so we're going to really spend time doing that, a lot of that this year.
So that's encouraging to hear. I think just the 2 things, and I know we're close to time, but just
Sure.
the 2 things that I'm really concerned about, and I want to invite my other colleagues to talk about. How will we monitor that all teachers are teaching on grade level? That is probably the core driver for us to improve student learning right now. And so that is, I think I've seen a few roadmaps for acceleration.
Yeah.
And so I would really love to see kind of what is going to be our focus there in terms of that, adopting the high quality instructional materials. And then the last thing is establishing that sense of belonging. I think the work that's happening with CRT is amazing. Attaching that with that affirmation and sense of belonging, plus that on grade level work, that's everything. That's how we're gonna move everybody up. And so those are just the things that I'm thinking about. If any of my colleagues want to make any comments here as well.
The only
Go
other
ahead.
thing I
Go
just
ahead,
want to
Dr.
add,
White.
the only other thing I just want to add is one of the visions I had going to, we just dropping a new strategic plan, but one of the visions you'll see it in the beginning of our strategic plan is last year I took multiple departments across our district, and I really wanted to start talking about what's the academic journey of a student. You heard Trinell say we go from birth to graduation. And so what we did was created a learner profile and an instructional framework. So in our learner profile, we talk about kids being global citizens, communicators, critical thinkers, innovators, and goal-directed learners. Because if the pandemic didn't teach us anything else, it taught us that students have executive function. Right. So in the past, we're like begging them to do things. And now kids had to get up on their own. They had to set the alarm clocks. They had to jump in Zooms. They had to keep track of their Zooms. So really being a goal-directed learner. But what I overlaid on top of that, and you'll see it titled The Academic Journey, was how are we going to get there? And I felt that with our teaching core and with everybody in our district that touches students, we all have to understand that culture and community is number 1. What does that look like when you walk into a school, when you walk into a classroom, when you feel the energy, when kids are able to talk? We talked about that some earlier. But we also talked about how we implement the curriculum. So number 1, we're writing it. What is curriculum implementation? That's the second part. Then the learning experiences kids will have, and then reflection and assessment. Those are the 4 things you will hear my team talk about moving forward as the triggers along with what you said to move that work. Because I think we had to go back and normalize that. And I don't think we had done that, where everybody can speak to what are the things we're going to focus on in the classroom and what do we want our students to look like when they leave us. And so we call that the academic journey.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to learning more about that, the academic journey. I know that I have a habit of going over, and I know I'm pushing up against it. So yes, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing those presentations afterwards, and I'll shoot over some of the resources we talked about today. But definitely, if there's a way to include in that evaluation tool you all are coming up with on is the teacher on grade level. I mean, that is so bare bones, but when we think about it, that's literally
Yeah.
that's the main thing we need, right? And so I appreciate hearing what you've developed with the
And we
academic
do
journey.
spend time working with our school leadership side. They make sure that they have us come to their meetings, and our content leads come to those meetings, and they talk about what goes on that quarter. They talk about what it should look like, what they should be looking for in the classroom, so that principals understand what that looks like going into a classroom.
Great. Well, thank you all again.
Madam Chairwoman,
So much. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to just really quickly, just to your point, and you make a great point. With the keep in mind, we are a very, very, very large school system, and oversight and accountability to ensure that the 9 or 10,000 educators are doing what Chairwoman just said. Incredibly important because we talk about students in the class, educators in the classroom, and we want to keep as much our money in the classroom, but we also need oversight, support, accountability, training, because to get to a level of systemic fidelity is harder when you got 10,000 educators than where I grew up, my school district, we had one high school for the whole district. It's just different. And so I think for us, Madam Chair, I think to have a discussion on how as we as a board, whether through the policy or budget process, can create that level of systemic fidelity across a district as large as ours.
Oh, yeah.
And models we're seeing, because to have majority do it is great. But unfortunately, our constituents are not trying to get like 75% don't mean much when you in a 25%. And so we just talk about that. But again, I support everything that we're doing. Our educators work the hardest, I know. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we get as many of them doing what they're supposed to be doing in a system as large as ours.
And we can do it. I'm so excited about everything I've heard tonight, and thank you again. And I'm ending better on time, guys. Come on, you gotta give me a hand clap for this. Doing better. Okay, well, thank you all so much. Have a lovely evening.
You do the same.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
To adjourn.